Our gospel reading for this morning comes from Luke, in that time when Jesus has gone into Jerusalem. It is post Palm Sunday. Jesus is teaching and working with his disciples in those last days that lead up to his arrest. Listen for what the Spirit would say to us this day from these words. When some were speaking about the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and gifts dedicated to God, Jesus said, "As for these things that you see, the days will come when not one stone will be left upon another. All will be thrown down." They asked him, "Teacher, when will this be, and what will the sign be that this is about to take place?" And he said, "Beware that you are not led astray. For many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and the time is near. Do not go after them. When you hear of wars and insurrections, do not be terrified, for these things must take place first, but the end will not follow immediately." Then he said to them, "Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, and in various places famines and plagues. And there will be dreadful portents and great signs from heaven. But before all this occurs, they will arrest you and persecute you. They will hand you over to synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors because of my name. This will give you an opportunity to testify. So make up your minds not to prepare your defense in advance. For I will give you words and a wisdom that none of your opponents will be able to withstand or contradict. You will be betrayed even by parents and brothers, by relatives and friends. And they will put some of you to death. You will be hated by all because of my name. But not a hair of your head will perish. By your endurance, you will gain your souls." And I think a perhaps preferable reading says, "By your endurance, you will gain your life." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. On a fairly regular basis, I hear comments about how impressive the sanctuary is. It may come from a person, a guest in worship for the first time. It may come from someone who happens by the church during the week. It may come from someone who's looking for a place to have a wedding. But routinely, I hear from people who say they're really impressed by the Gothic-style architecture of this sanctuary. Occasionally, I even get people from a box-style megachurch who want to know if it's okay for them to get married here in a real sanctuary. And when I first saw this church's property 10 years ago, it was this sanctuary that grabbed me, both the inside and the outside of it. And yet, I have a feeling that our sanctuary would look quite unimpressive next to that temple in Jerusalem. The temple in our gospel reading is a replacement for Solomon's temple, which had been destroyed by the Babylonians some 600 years before Jesus' time. It was a grand, huge, marvelous structure. Something that was referred to as one of the wonders of the ancient world. And it had been constructed by Herod the Great, a master builder, some 20 years before Jesus was born. And this impressive feat of architecture is known to us only from ancient descriptions. It was entirely destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD, some 35, 40 years after Jesus. And all that remained of the once fabulous temple was a small amount of the retaining wall that was around the raised area on which the temple itself stood. And we know that little bit of the retaining wall today as the Wailing Wall. And even the Wailing Wall all by itself is pretty impressive. And so I can only imagine what it must have been like for a Jew who had lived his life in the countryside, who'd never been to Jerusalem, never been to any city, to come into town for some festival and see that magnificent, towering temple for the first time. Surely it must have produced a kind of awe and wonder we can only imagine. Maybe something like what a few people feel when they go and see St. Peter's in the Vatican for the first time. And so it's hardly surprising to hear that some of those with Jesus are oohing and awing about how wonderful it is, about what a spiritual moment, what a religious experience it is to be there. Which only makes what Jesus says all that much more stunning. Not one stone will be left upon another. All will be thrown down. Imagine how people today would react if some horrific event destroyed St. Peter's. Or on a secular level, imagine that something destroyed the White House, the Capitol, the Washington Monument, and all the buildings along the National Mall in Washington, D.C. What would people do? What would they say? I'm pretty sure some of them would be talking about the end. And that's precisely what those folks with Jesus think about when they hear Jesus say the grand temple is going to be destroyed. And so they want to know when this is going to happen. Teacher, when will this be? And what will be a sign that this is about to take place? But Jesus doesn't answer their question. In fact, here and in many other places, Jesus always tries to deflect his followers' interest in the end times. He assures them that when it happens, it will be so obvious that no one can miss it. But in the meantime, his followers are not to waste their time trying to figure out when that will be. How we act, how we live, is not supposed to be influenced by whether or not we think the end is near. Our lives are supposed to be about showing to the world God's coming kingdom, showing the hope of that new day. And Jesus tells his followers that when they face troubles, when they face persecutions and even death, that these things are not the end. They are not signs of the end. Rather, they are opportunities. This will give you an opportunity to testify. Actually, that's not exactly what Jesus says. Bible translators, they like to clean up idiomatic phrases that come from the Greek or the Hebrew. And I suppose that's what they were doing when they translated these verses. But what Jesus actually says about all this trouble that will come their way is, it will lead you into testimony. And I kind of like the sound of that. All of this trouble is not something for you simply to endure, but it leads to something. You know, our nation and a lot of the churches and congregation in this nation are going through some hard times right now. The bad economy has cost many people their jobs, and it's also means that a lot of churches, not to mention organizations that try to do good in the world, are hurting for money. And in the midst of all of this, it is a temptation to think that our troubles are somehow ultimate troubles. Still, I am amazed at the number of Christians who somehow think that the global economic crisis is a sign of the end times. Christians of all people should know better. And we should also listen to what Jesus says about when Christians are facing great difficulty. These are opportunities. They lead to something. At least they do for those who are willing to let the Spirit guide them. When things are going badly, when money is short, when there's not much to be excited about or hopeful about, it is the natural tendency to want to hold on, to hunker down, and wait for things to get better. But I wonder if this doesn't miss the point of the opportunities Jesus is speaking of. Hunkering down probably doesn't lead to anything. But seeing hard times as opportunity could lead to something. For individuals who are struggling to get by on less, it could lead to a reassessing of what is important, of what really matters. It could lead to a life less driven by, less controlled by success and things. And something similar could happen in congregations. Budget shortfalls could be an opportunity. They could lead to a new clarity about who we are and what God is calling us to do. They could lead to a new identity that better shows Christ to the world. They could, if we are willing to let the Spirit guide us. For this congregation, today is the day when we ordain and install elders and deacons who will lead this congregation in its worship and ministry in the world. And as they take office, they will make promises to God and to us that they will seek to follow Jesus as they lead us. I made the exact same promises when I became pastor. And I was pretty serious about those promises, and I suspect that the people today will be just as serious about theirs. But just as Jesus warns his followers that they must rely on the wisdom that he will give them, so too we must rely on the Spirit, on the wisdom that comes to us. But I know from experience, from watching elders and deacons at work and from my own work, that we will be tempted to use our own wisdom. God does give us gifts and talents, and we are to use them. But if we do not rely on the wisdom Jesus sends us, we may well figure out creative ways to hold on and even to be successful. But without the Spirit guiding us, it will not lead to much. But when we allow God to work through us, Jesus insists that it will lead us to the new life God desires for each of us. Thanks be to God.